An elderly veteran, struggling to breathe after a brutal attack, collapsed as his pacemaker failed. Just when the crowd thought it was too late, a royal guard made a move that no one saw coming. Here's the incredible moment. Before we continue, let us know in the comments below where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow at the same time, we'll bring you another incredible story showcasing the bravery and discipline of the Royal Guard. You won't want to miss it. The late autumn wind whistled through the iron gates of Buckingham Palace as James Wilson adjusted his Royal Marines veteran pin, his weathered fingers brushing against the commemorative medals that told stories of battles fought long ago. At 68, his military bearing remained evident in his straight spine and measured steps, though time had taken its toll in other ways. The morning sun caught the edge of the small medical alert bracelet on his wrist, a constant reminder of the pacemaker that now regulated his heartbeat. A souvenir, he often joked, from years of pushing his body to its limits in service of the crown. The device had become necessary after a particularly severe heart attack 3 years ago, but James refused to let it define him or diminish his weekly visits to the palace he'd sworn to protect in his youth. "Beautiful morning for it," he murmured to himself, nodding respectfully to the royal guard standing at attention nearby. The guard's scarlet tunic blazed against the grey stone walls, his posture perfect, ceremonial rifle held with parade ground precision. James recognized that bearing, the kind that spoke of real service beneath the ceremonial duty. The guard's eyes remained fixed forward, but James caught the almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. It was a subtle thing, this brotherhood between servicemen, visible only to those who understood its weight. The morning air carried the familiar scent of polish and pressed wool that brought James back to his own days in uniform. A small group of tourists had gathered nearby, their excited chatter and camera clicks providing a gentle backdrop to the scene. Children pointed at the guard's bearskin cap, while their parents consulted guidebooks and maps. The atmosphere was peaceful, respectful, the kind of morning that reminded James why he kept coming back to this place. His hand drifted unconsciously to his chest, feeling the slight ridge where the pacemaker sat beneath his jacket. The doctor's warnings echoed in his mind. "Avoid stress, Mr. Wilson. No sudden shocks. The device is reliable, but we don't want to test its limits." He'd nodded then, just as he had during countless mission briefings, acknowledging the risks while accepting them as part of life's duty. The guard shifted position with mechanical precision, his boots clicking against the stones in a movement honed by centuries of tradition. James smiled, remembering the hours of practice such perfection required. He stepped back to give a young family a better view, his own appreciation for the ceremony undiminished by familiarity. The morning light strengthened, promising a fine day ahead. James settled into his favourite spot, a quiet corner with a clear view of both the palace and the guard. Here, among the echoes of history and dedication, he felt most at peace. But as the crowd began to thicken with the day's first wave of visitors, none could have guessed how this peaceful scene would soon be shattered. The first sign of trouble came with the sound of breaking glass. A half-empty beer bottle shattered against the palace wall, causing nearby tourists to jump and scatter. Ray Dawson's harsh laugh cut through the morning air like a rusty blade. "Oi! What's everyone looking at?" Ray's massive frame shouldered through the crowd, leaving a wake of stumbling tourists and muttered apologies. His leather jacket, stretched tight across broad shoulders, bore the scars of countless pub fights. The reek of cheap beer and cigarettes announced his presence before his voice did. "Just some fancy building, innit?" James Wilson watched the newcomer with the practiced eye of a veteran, noting the telltale signs of a man looking for trouble. Ray's hands, curled into perpetual fists, spoke of someone who solved problems with violence. His bloodshot eyes darted around the courtyard, seeking a target worthy of his attention. "Move it, Grandad!" Ray snarled, deliberately bumping into an elderly woman who didn't step aside quickly enough. "Some of us ain't got all day to stand around gawking." His accent carried the rough edge of London's meaner streets, thick with contempt for anything resembling authority or refinement. The crowd instinctively created space around him, parents pulling children closer, couples stepping back. Ray seemed to feed off their discomfort, his swagger becoming more pronounced with each step. The morning sun caught the brass knuckles partially visible in his jacket pocket. Not a fashion statement, but a warning. James felt his heart skip a beat as Ray's gaze swept past him, the pacemaker humming quietly in response. He'd seen this type before, during his service years. Men who mistook cruelty for strength, who built themselves up by tearing others down. His hand moved unconsciously toward his chest, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "What's wrong with you, then?" Ray's attention locked onto James like a predator spotting wounded prey. "Got something to say, old-timer?" He changed direction, moving with the deliberate menace of someone who'd made an art of intimidation. The Royal Guard remained motionless at his post, but there was a subtle shift in his bearing, a tension visible only to those who knew what to look for. James straightened his spine, military training kicking in despite the years between then and now. "Nothing to say, sir," James replied evenly, using the courteous tone that often infuriated men like Ray more than any insult could. "Just enjoying the morning." Ray's face darkened at the polite response. He stepped closer, alcohol-soured breath hitting James's face. "Sir? Sir?" He mimicked the word with ugly amusement. "Listen to this one, putting on airs like he's somebody." His eyes caught the glint of James's medals. "Playing dress-up with your little pins, are you?" The morning had grown quieter, the usual tourist chatter dying away as more people noticed the confrontation brewing. The Royal Guard's shadow fell across the stones between the two men, a silent reminder of authority that seemed to irritate Ray further. "You know what I think?" Ray's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I think you lot who hang around here, showing off your medals and whatnot, you're just begging for attention." His hand shot out, fingers brushing against one of James's medals. "Let's see how special these really are, shall we?" "I'd appreciate it if you didn't touch the medals," James said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from commanding men in battle. They were earned in service. Ray's fingers closed around the medal anyway, his knuckles whitening. Earned, were they? Doing what? Standing around like that muppet over there? He jerked his head toward the Royal Guard. Playing soldier while real men did the fighting? James took a measured step back, conscious of his heart's slightly irregular rhythm. "Son, I served in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. Lost good men there. These medals—" "Northern Ireland!" Ray barked a harsh laugh, using his grip on the medal to pull James closer. "That's ancient history, old man, just like you." His other hand prodded James's chest roughly. "What's this then? Something wrong with your ticker?" James winced, the pressure uncomfortably close to his pacemaker. "I have a heart condition," he stated firmly, trying to create distance. "A pacemaker. You need to step back." "A pacemaker?" Ray's eyes lit up with cruel delight. "Hear that, everyone? The big brave soldier needs a machine to keep his heart beating." His voice rose, deliberately drawing attention. "Bit dramatic in it, using your broken heart to get sympathy." The crowd had grown larger, drawn by the confrontation. A young mother hurried past, shielding her children's eyes. An elderly couple stepped forward as if to intervene, then hesitated as Ray's threatening posture made them think better of it. "Last warning," James said, his breath coming slightly shorter now. "The doctors were very clear about avoiding stress. You don't want—" "Don't want what?" Ray shoved him, not hard enough to knock him down, but enough to make James stagger. "Don't want to upset your delicate condition. Don't want to find out if that machine in your chest really works." The Royal Guard remained motionless, but his knuckles had whitened on his rifle. James could feel his heart racing now, the pacemaker working harder to maintain rhythm. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Look at him shaking," Ray announced to the crowd, shoving James again. "Not so brave now, are you? All those medals, but one little push and you're trembling like a leaf." James's hand pressed against his chest, his voice growing strained. "The pacemaker. You need to stop. I'm not joking about—" "About what? Your special heart?" Another push, harder this time. "Maybe we should test it, yeah? See how much excitement it can take?" Ray's face was inches from James's now, spittle flying as he shouted, "Come on, soldier! Where's that fighting spirit?" The crowd's murmurs had turned to sounds of alarm. Someone called out that they were calling the police. Ray ignored them all, focused entirely on his victim's increasing distress. "What's wrong, old man? Can't take a little excitement?" He grabbed James's jacket, shaking him. "All that combat experience, but you can't handle one little conversation." James's face had gone pale, his breathing laboured. The pacemaker was struggling to maintain rhythm against the surge of adrenaline and fear. "Please," he gasped, "my heart." "Your heart! Your heart," Ray mocked, giving him another violent shake. "Always with the excuses. Well, let's see just how bad this condition of yours really is." With that, he shoved James hard enough to send him stumbling backward. The veteran's legs hit the curb, and he went down, his head striking the stone with a sickening thud. His body went rigid, then terrifyingly still. "Get up!" Ray's voice cracked with sudden panic as he stared at James's motionless form. "Stop faking it, old man!" He lurched forward, grabbing James's shoulders and shaking him violently. "I barely touched you!" James remained unresponsive, his skin taking on a bluish tinge. The pacemaker, overwhelmed by the combination of physical trauma and emotional stress, was struggling to maintain its life-saving rhythm. His chest barely moved, each shallow breath more laboured than the last. "Come on, quit the act!" Ray's hands trembled as he continued shaking the veteran. "You're just trying to get me in trouble." The false bravado in his voice couldn't mask his growing fear. "Wake up, you lying bastard!" A woman in the crowd screamed for someone to call an ambulance. Others stood frozen, horrified by the scene unfolding before them. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across James's face, highlighting its deathly pallor. "He told you about his heart," someone shouted. "He warned you." Ray's panic turned to manic energy. He slapped James's face, each strike harder than the last. "Stop it! Stop pretending!" His voice rose to a hysterical pitch. "Get up! You're faking! I know you're faking!" The veteran's body jerked with each impact, but his eyes remained closed, his lips taking on a darker blue. The pacemaker, designed to regulate normal cardiac stress, was never meant to handle this level of trauma. "You can't do this to me!" Ray's actions grew more frenzied, alternating between violent shakes and desperate pleas. "I'm not going to jail because you want to play dead." His hands moved to James's collar, yanking him upright, only to let him fall back against the stones. "Wake up, damn you!" The crowd's horror mounted as they watched Ray's assault on the unconscious veteran continue. Some turned away, unable to bear witnessing what looked increasingly like a man's last moments. Others called out for help, their voices desperate in the morning air. "Stop touching him!" An elderly man stepped forward, his own service medals glinting. "You're making it worse." But Ray was beyond reason, trapped in a spiral of panic and violence. "It's all an act!" He yanked at James's jacket, sending one of the medals skittering across the stones. "Nobody dies from being pushed. Nobody!" The Royal Guard stood at his post, every muscle tensed as he watched the scene unfold. His training warred with his duty, the sacred obligation to maintain his post, fighting against every instinct to intervene. Through his ceremonial stillness, his eyes tracked every movement, measuring distances, calculating angles. Ray's assault continued, growing more desperate with each passing second. "Wake up!" He grabbed James's shoulders again, slamming him against the ground. "You're lying! You have to be lying!" James's head lolled lifelessly with each impact. His face had taken on the grey pallor that anyone with medical training would recognize as a sign of critical cardiac distress. The pacemaker, overtaxed and failing, could no longer maintain its vital rhythm. "I'll show you what real pain is." Ray raised his fist, blind panic giving way to primitive rage. "Maybe this will wake you up." The morning light caught the brass knuckles as he drew back his arm, the metal gleaming with deadly promise. The crowd gasped collectively, realizing that they were about to witness something even more horrific. That's when it happened. The sound of boots moving across stone cut through the chaos like a rifle shot. The guard's ceremonial stance shattered into pure military precision as he covered the distance in 3 long strides. Before Ray's fist could complete its arc, before he could deliver what might have been a fatal blow, a white-gloved hand locked around his wrist with iron force. "Step back." The guard's voice carried the cold authority of a loaded weapon. Ray's head snapped up, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and defiance. "He's faking! Can't you see he's—" The guard's other hand shot out, shoving Ray with controlled violence. The thug stumbled backward, caught off balance by the unexpected strength behind the move. He landed hard on the pavement, his brass knuckles clattering away across the stones. In the same fluid motion, the guard dropped to one knee beside James, his training shifting seamlessly from combat to life-saving. The guard's movements were precise, each action born from years of emergency response training. His white gloves flew to James's neck, checking for a pulse, finding it weak and erratic. 8 years of military service had taught him that seconds could mean the difference between life and death. "Clear the area!" His command voice cut through the panicked murmurs of the crowd. The ceremonial bearing was gone, replaced by the urgent authority of a combat veteran. His fingers moved to James's chest, locating the ridge of the pacemaker beneath the jacket. "You're just helping him fake it!" Ray scrambled to his feet, his earlier panic giving way to defensive anger. "He's putting on a show!" The guard ignored him, focused entirely on James. The veteran's lips had taken on a darker blue, his chest barely rising. With swift efficiency, the guard tilted James's head back, checking his airway before beginning chest compressions. Each movement was measured, careful to avoid the pacemaker while maintaining the rhythm that might save the veteran's life. 1, 2, 3. The guard counted under his breath, decades of training taking over. His white gloves stood out starkly against James's dark jacket, keeping time with a precision that matched his ceremonial duties. Between compressions, he delivered rescue breaths, ignoring the scattered gasps from the crowd. "Look at this performance!" Ray's voice took on a manic edge. "They're both in on it, trying to make me look bad." The guard continued his life-saving efforts, each compression delivered with the same dedication he brought to his ceremonial duties. Sweat began to dampen his collar, the bearskin cap still perfectly positioned, despite his movements. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one marked by the steady rhythm of CPR. The guard's world narrowed to this single task, protecting life, just as he'd sworn to do. His training hadn't differentiated between standing guard and saving lives. Both were part of his sacred duty. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, James gasped. Colour began returning to his face as his pacemaker, given the chance to reset, resumed its vital work. His eyes fluttered open, focusing first on the guard's concerned face above him. "Thank you, son," he managed weakly, his military bearing returning even as he lay on the ground. "Knew you had our backs." The guard nodded once, helping James sit up slowly, supporting him with the same precision he brought to his ceremonial duties. "Easy, sir. The ambulance is on its way." "Unbelievable!" Ray's voice cracked through the moment like breaking glass. "I knew it! Look at him! Perfectly fine! This was all a setup!" He stepped forward, gesturing wildly. "You can't arrest me for this. He was faking the whole thing." James winced at the loud voice, his hand moving instinctively to his chest. The guard's posture shifted subtly, placing himself between the veteran and his attacker. The morning sun caught his brass buttons as he turned, no longer the ceremonial sentry, but a warrior preparing for combat. "Still pretending?" Ray's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "Got your toy soldier to play along with your little heart attack game. I barely touched you, and now you're both acting like—" The guard rose in one fluid motion, his movement carrying the deadly grace of a predator. The ceremonial rifle settled across his back as he faced Ray, his white gloves now marked with the evidence of his life-saving efforts. "You were warned," the guard's voice carried the cold precision of a drawn blade. "He told you about his condition. You chose to continue your assault." "Assault?" Ray barked a harsh laugh that didn't quite mask his growing unease. "It was just a bit of fun. Look at him, he's fine. Probably doesn't even have a real pacemaker, just another old man crying for attention." In one fluid motion, faster than anyone could react, the guard's white-gloved hand shot out and locked around Ray's throat. The movement carried the precision of military training combined with the controlled fury of righteous judgment. "Can't breathe?" The guard's voice remained eerily calm as he backed Ray against the palace wall. "Feeling your heart race, your chest tighten?" His grip was calculated, firm enough to restrict air, careful enough to avoid permanent damage. Interesting how quickly the body can betray us, isn't it? Ray's hands clawed at the guard's iron grip, his eyes widening with genuine panic. His feet barely touched the ground as the guard held him there, demonstrating a strength that ceremonial duties had hidden but not diminished. "Stop!" Ray wheezed, his face reddening. "You can't!" "Can't what?" The guard's voice carried a deadly softness. "Can't defend someone you attacked. Can't show you exactly what it feels like when your body fails you." His grip tightened fractionally. "When every breath becomes a struggle." The morning sun cast both men in sharp relief. The guard's scarlet uniform brilliant against Ray's now pallid face, his white gloves stark against the thug's throat. The crowd watched in stunned silence, witnessing justice being delivered with military precision. "Please." Ray's voice was barely a whisper now, his struggles growing weaker. His face had taken on the same bluish tinge that James's had shown minutes earlier. "Oh, now you understand the word please." The guard's grip remained steady. "Now you know what it feels like when someone ignores your pleas, when they continue hurting you despite your warnings." James had managed to stand, supported by bystanders. "That's enough, son," he said quietly. "He's learned his lesson." The guard held for one more second, letting Ray feel the full weight of helplessness before releasing his grip. Ray collapsed to the ground, coughing and gasping, his hands clutching his throat as he desperately sucked in air. "You're just—" Ray wheezed between breaths. "You're just acting tough. You can't—" "Can't what?" The guard's voice cut through Ray's gasping. "Can't show you what real strength looks like. Can't demonstrate the difference between bullying and true power." He straightened to his full height, looking down at the crumpled figure before him. "You chose to attack a man who warned you about his heart condition. You chose to continue when he was unconscious. Those were your choices. This?" He gestured to Ray's continued wheezing. "This was mine." Ray struggled to his feet, his earlier bravado shattered, but his stubborn defiance still flickering. "I'll report you. Get you fired." "Report what?" The guard's voice carried a dangerous edge. "That you assaulted a disabled veteran, ignored his medical warnings, and continued attacking him while he was unconscious. That when faced with the consequences of your actions, you experienced a fraction of the distress you so eagerly inflicted on others." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Ray's eyes darted toward the street, calculating his chances of escape. The guard's posture shifted slightly, a subtle reminder that any such attempt would be deeply unwise. "You're nothing but a thug with a fancy costume," Ray spat, his voice still raspy. acting all high and mighty with your uniform and your rules. The police officers approached with practiced caution, taking in the scene before them. James stood supported by concerned bystanders, his medals now carefully collected and returned to their proper place. The guard had resumed his post, his bearing once again ceremonial, though there was a new awareness in the crowd of the warrior beneath the ritual. "He attacked me!" Ray's voice cracked as he pointed at the guard, standing there acting innocent now, "but he tried to kill me." The elderly couple who had witnessed everything stepped forward. "After you nearly killed the veteran," the woman stated firmly, "after you ignored his warnings about his heart condition." "He was faking," Ray insisted, though his hand unconsciously moved to his throat. "It was all an act." "The paramedics will determine that," one officer cut in, nodding to the approaching ambulance, "along with the bruising on your neck and the brass knuckles we found on the ground." Ray's face contorted with desperate rage. "You're all against me, taking his side because of some fancy uniform." "We're taking the side of truth," the second officer stated, producing handcuffs. "Assaulting a vulnerable person is a serious offence, Mr. Dawson," Ray spat, "and I know my rights. You can't—" "Mr. Dawson, you have the right to remain silent," the officer continued professionally, securing the cuffs. "I strongly suggest you exercise it." As they led Ray away, his protests grew more desperate, more unhinged. "It's not fair. He was asking for it, standing there with his medals, acting all superior. And that guard, he's not allowed to touch people. He's supposed to just stand there." The guard remained motionless at his post, but there was something in his bearing now, a quiet deadliness that hadn't been visible before. The morning sun caught his brass buttons, no longer just decorative, but marking a man who had demonstrated the true meaning of his position. James straightened his jacket, declining the paramedics' offer of a stretcher. "This old soldier can walk," he said firmly, though he accepted their support. As he passed the guard's position, he paused. No words were exchanged, none were needed. The slight nod between them spoke volumes about service, sacrifice, and the brotherhood that transcended time. If this story teaches us anything, it's that true strength isn't found in bullying the vulnerable, but in standing up for what's right. The Royal Guard demonstrated that duty goes beyond ceremony. It's about protecting the values and people we hold dear. What would you have done in this situation? Would you have broken protocol to save a life? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Remember, respect isn't just about following rules. It's about understanding the weight of tradition and the sacrifices of those who came before us. The uniform these guards wear represents centuries of service, honour, and unwavering dedication to duty. Next time you visit Buckingham Palace or see a royal guard, remember, behind that ceremonial stance stands a highly trained soldier ready to act when duty calls. If you appreciated this story about honour and justice, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about the Royal Guards. Hit that bell icon to never miss an upload. Check out our previous videos about Royal Guards appearing on your screen right now. Each one offers a unique glimpse into the world of these remarkable servicemen. Until next time, remember, real strength shows itself not in how we treat the powerful, but in how we protect the vulnerable.